welcome to All About Movies, the podcast talk show all about movies. I'm your host, Evan. I've got a nice piece of paper on my wall that says I'm qualified to talk about movies. I'm here with my buddy Jack, who you might remember from one of the Marvel Phases episodes. He's a history major right now, big World War II buff, so I thought I'd bring him on to talk about kind of the more contemporary World War II movie. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Hey, Evan, how's it going?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. So, you nicely prepared a good assortment of World War II movies for us to talk about today. There's Saving Private Ryan, Inglourious Bastards, Anthropoid, Valkyrie, Sophie Scholl, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Scholl. My German is garbage, despite how we both were in a German class together. Pearl Harbor, and Dunkirk. So that's a nice, huge variety. I've seen most of these films. I haven't gotten the chance to revisit all of them as recently as Jack nicely has for this episode. But I think his expertise here will help us maybe dissect some things. What exactly do you look for out of a movie that takes place in World War II? Is accuracy to things a pretty big, important thing?
If it's trying to tell a story, like something that actually happened during World War II, I think that is the number one thing that should be taken into consideration. And so, things like, if you take like Inglourious Bastards, for example, that's a fantasy story set in World War II. There I don't care about accuracy very much, but because it's just trying to tell a story set in that time period. But for like all these other ones, except for Saving Private Ryan, they're trying to tell the actual story of what was going on.
That's fair. Do you find that extends past just World War II movies, or since World War II is kind of a focus of yours, is it extra important?
I think it's extra important because that's a period of history that is really important for how, like, the world is shaped nowadays. That if you don't learn about it correctly, you misinterpret everything else that's going on.
That's true. If things aren't done quite right, you might end up with things like Nazis running around in 2018.
Yeah.
Wouldn't want something like that. So, out of these movies, how accurate would you say they are in terms of, like, the little things like costuming and maybe like the equipment used, like tanks and planes and that sort of thing? How well do you suppose they do?
A lot of them are really, really good. That all of them that I've found really hit the nail on setting the correct time period for clothing and weapons and stuff like that. There's just like little things that, since I've studied World War II for like over a decade of my life, that things like that I've noticed that are not as accurate as they could be. So if you take like, should we start with Saving Private Ryan?
Sure.
Alright, one of the main things that I always think is really dumb when I see it, when I watch the movie, is it Tom Hanks' characters? He's the captain.
Yeah.
The fact that he has the bar captain, the 2 silver bars on his helmet, that signals that he is a captain, would not be done in a wartime, like, theater. Because that's a big signal to snipers saying, hey, I'm an important dude, you should shoot me. So that would be like, the bars would not be on there.
That's a good point. So since we're on Saving Private Ryan, that's kind of the thing that, at least to me, kicks off the newer, more contemporary World War II movie thing. It got Best Director. Everyone loved it, went to see it. I heard World War II vets couldn't handle being in the movie just because of how real it was.
Yeah, it set them off. That they were actually experiencing it again of what they had suffered during the invasion.
That's nuts. That's nuts. Do you think that this trend would have happened around this time if it wasn't for this film made by a very competent director, Steven Spielberg? If there wasn't such a quality film, would we have gotten this, I don't want to say rush of World War II movies, because it's kind of spanned over a decade, but still like a more trend in World War II movies?
I don't think it would be as prevalent as what we see nowadays for the World War II movies. Like, they really died out, I think it was like after, right around Vietnam or so, is where a bunch of the war movies just were stopped being made, because it was like the whole anti-war sentiment of Vietnam was like turning people off from going to see things like war movies.
That's fair. And then when Spielberg comes around, box office success, he kind of can do what he wants.
Yeah.
And, maybe he'll be more inclined to do things that he would have watched as a younger guy, which would have been the pre-Vietnam World War II style films. So it kind of makes sense that would happen. Yeah, and if you look at maybe kind of the things that kept it alive, there's the spiritual, at least, successor to Saving Private Ryan, I think Tom Hanks produced HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, which It's not a movie, but I feel we'd be remiss not to touch on it.
Yeah, it would be so bad, though, if it was a movie instead of a TV series, because the TV series allowed it to, like, you actually get to know the characters. You grow attached to the characters, and you feel really bad when they die. And you wouldn't just get anywhere near the amount of events that were covered in the series. So that's actually one of my favorite, like, TV series ever, just because of them telling the story of the 101st Airborne, which is, they were like the number one, like, airborne division group for the U.S. history ever. So it was really cool to see their stories actually being told.
That is nice. See, these things are why I have you on here, because I don't know a lot of actual history, so mostly I have these movies to go on. Kind of jumping around a bit, you have later films by Quentin Tarantino. Inglourious Basterds is a big example of maybe another big director who was able to score a home run with the World War II genre.
Yeah.
This film kind of taking a different approach to it, a little oddly comical, a little grittier. And which you touched on this already, but how do you think of it as a movie that's not striving for historical accuracy?
I really just enjoy the movie. That's just really fun to watch. Whenever I've watched it probably minimum 20 times, and I'm still always enthralled watching it, just because, like, the characters are so well made and the dialogue is fantastic. So it's just always entertaining to watch.
Yeah, and to give people a little background in case they've not seen this film on what it's about, Inglourious Basterds is the plot of a group of kind of special ops American forces, mostly Jewish Americans, who are out causing a bunch of havoc in Nazi Germany, and they, trying to kill Hitler with a big plot. Also going on is the story of a Jewish person in hiding, also naturally wanting to kill Hitler. And spoiler alert, they oddly enough do.
Yeah.
And really both of them do.
Yeah, and it's, I think, actually one of the funniest moments of the movie is when you see, because they do it's not a long shot, but it's like a good couple of seconds of you seeing one of the Jewish soldiers just machine gunning Hitler's face, which is like, they made him like look really rubbery so you can see like the skin bouncing around and everything, so it's actually really funny to watch.
Right, and he even changes magazines out to keep shooting Hitler. I know a lot of people that blew them away. They were like, I didn't think they were going to kill Hitler because that's not what happened.
Yeah.
Like, people are like, how are they going to be stopped from killing Hitler? As I think on the first viewing, what you're waiting for the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of twist there was, I think the first time I saw the movie, a little off-putting. I was like, what? Excuse me? It was a brave choice, and one that I'm very glad they did.
Yeah. Which I was glad that happened, because it was like, is this gonna be like they all get killed before it happens or something like that? Which about half of them do die before they actually get to try and kill Hitler, but yeah, I was just glad to see that actually happened.
There's a fan theory, since Quentin Tarantino's movies are also connected, that Inglourious Bastards is like actually how in his movies the U.S. won World War II, and because of that like absurdly violent way, a way that according to history books had the U.S. colluding with a Jewish killing guy to win the war, because one of the head Nazis in the movie turns turncoat because it's like, I want the war to end, and I want the history books to say you were fine with me killing all these Jewish people. So
I thought that was just to save his own skin more than anything.
Well, yeah, that's fair too. So, yeah, a lot of people are like, if in history books you're saying the U.S. condoned like a good chunk of the Holocaust and violently exploded every Nazi to death, you might end up with a more violent world because of this.
Yeah.
Or at least in part because of this. I don't know. You watch a fair amount of Tarantino movies. I don't know where that sits with you as an idea.
I think that works because, man, it's that a violent setup. He's set up for just every one of his movies.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the actual war ended because we dropped the biggest bombs ever made on some country. So, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows how that would happen in alternative history land. But if we're looking at a more accurate look at plots to kill Nazis, I like that segue there. Yep. We can move on to Anthropoid, a movie that I didn't hear anything about when it first was coming out, and it was kind of more on its DVD release that I heard mostly from you about this movie coming out, and also then a little later, a slight cult following online. It got it a nice Blu-ray release, which I see you have here. It's got a slipcover, I think from Best Buy, just judging by the looks of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I like that I can tell where a Blu-ray came from just by the looks of it, but here we are. Maybe summarize this movie a bit for us. I haven't gotten to see it myself, and I don't think a lot of people have yet.
All right. So the plot of Anthropoid is following along with the Operation Anthropoid that existed during World War II. The whole point of it was to assassinate the number 3 guy in the Nazi regime. It's Reinhard Heydrich, who he's the dude that came up with the final solution for the Jews. So he was the dude that thought of, hey, let's kill all of them with the concentration camps. And so the plot is a bunch of Czech freedom fighters are working with the British. They parachute into Prague, where Heydrich is at, and the whole thing is, how are they going to kill him? And then what happens to the soldiers after they succeed in killing Heydrich.
Interesting. Now, would you say, since this is based on a true story, unlike the previous movie, would you say that this keeps a pretty good, accurate look at the true events of this plot?
Yes.
Hitler doesn't explode at the end, that's for sure.
Nope. Hydra gets a bit exploded. That they show it accurately of how he died is that they threw a grenade into his car as he was driving by. That
for a big plan, that's not where I
Nope.
would have thought it ended.
Well, the whole plan was that there was like one corner because he travels at super high speeds, but there's one corner on the street that he has to slow down at. So one of the guys was supposed to show up and just machine gun him at that corner, like just jump out in front of his car and then just blast the hell out of it.
Huh.
Well, the machine gun jammed,
Oh,
so
geez.
he had to run, and then another dude threw a grenade in. And he survived that. He would end up dying from the horse hairs that is what the seats were made out of. Got embedded into like his liver and his spleen and stuff from the explosion, and that was what killed him.
Huh.
And
Well,
so they'd show that all accurately and everything. So I enjoyed that because it was done exactly how it was done in real life, and there was a 1970s movie of this that Anthropoid is kind of a remake of that also shows all that happening as well.
Interesting.
There's one major thing that didn't exist in real life was this really forced love plot involving a Czech spy and Cillian Murphy's character, I believe it was, which literally doesn't serve the plot in any way. They just threw it in for some reason. I'm not sure why. It doesn't actually do anything. But, yeah, so, other than that, it was really good. This was, like, really, really dark, though, to watch, because unlike the 70s version, this one's rated R, so they show, like, everyone dying. Like, one dude took, during the massive N battle, he takes a grenade that really injures him, so, like, his face is completely marred by the explosion, and then it shows him actually, like, shooting himself instead of being captured by the Nazis. So that's really dark, and they actually showed, like, what happened. The Nazis captured the family that was supporting these spies. They show the torture that actually happened to them, which is not in the 70s one, which is really dark to watch.
I don't think there would, even without all this, be any sympathy for these Nazis being killed, because, they're Nazis.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see that you're getting the full scope of it, just to be like, these guys are really bad.
Yeah.
Even for Nazis.
You actually get to see, it's the Gestapo doing the torturing, so you actually get to see, like, what the Gestapo would do to people.
But this is a recommend from you, then.
Yes, it is, because it's the only actual assassination attempt on a high-ranking Nazi officer or leader that actually succeeded. So it's, I think, really cool to actually see how that was done. Because, like, even, like, Hitler, there are over 50 attempts to kill him in different assassination plots in his life. None of them succeeded. So this one is like, hey, this is what could have happened, but we took out Heydrich because he was, like, after Hitler and Himmler, it was Heydrich. And he was the easiest one to get out of the three, so they took him out.
Well, that's fair. Any last things you want to say about Anthropoid before we move on to the next film?
Nah, I think that's good.
Alright. And see, it's nice because we can also do a nice little segue, because here we've got another plot to kill some Nazis.
Yep.
In fact, the top Nazis, specifically Hitler. We've got Valkyrie here. The nice thing about this is it kind of takes it from the German perspective, because it was other German officers trying to kill Hitler.
Yep.
I remember seeing this when it came out, but I haven't really heard a lot about it since. I think it's kind of been forgotten a little.
Yeah, which I think that's a bit of a sad one because after rewatching it, I was like, holy crap, is this accurate to everything that was happening during this time?
It also did an not to get off topic at all, but it did an odd thing at the beginning, which I've not really seen in any other historical films or any films made by Americans for about foreign events, takes place in foreign lands with other non-English speakers. It starts off with people speaking in German, and slowly fades into it being English.
Yeah.
Just like we're being put into the story. It's kind of a weird, from a filmmaking perspective, a weird narrative device, which it's very weird to me. I don't know where that sits with you. I think I like it. I don't want to see it happen all the time, but I'm glad that they tried it out.
I thought it was good for this one because everyone in this movie is German. So it makes sense. Hey, we're going to start a little bit. It was like maybe, like 15, 20 seconds of
it's not a lot.
Listening to Tom Cruise speak German. And then it goes into just Tom Cruise speaking English. I believe that's the part where he's like writing in his journal or something.
Yeah, it is. That's the big takeaway that I remember from the movie is that moment, just because it was so weird to me. How was his German? I don't remember. Did he sound pretty good?
Yeah, it sounded like German.
I mean, that's all you can ask for, really, with German.
And it wasn't like really heavy American accented German.
Right.
It sounded fairly fluent German. It wasn't like me trying to speak German where you can very
Same
clearly
here.
Hear my Iowan accent.
Yeah, there's a lot of things one can dislike Tom Cruise for. All of them, though, are predominantly things about him personally, because if you look at him as an actor, he puts a lot of effort, especially if you look at the Mission Impossible movies. He kind of trained to crash a helicopter. He's got over 500 hours on helicopter flying now.
Yep.
He climbs up buildings, like, attaches himself to planes flying through the air. And here it sounds like he learned some pretty good German.
Mm-hmm. And actually, his personal life is actually what nearly derailed this movie.
Oh, yeah?
Yep, because the Germans, apparently the person that was in charge of the, like, religion stuff in the German CDU party, that's their, at the time in 2008, was their running government political party.
Right, it's one of the bigger parties there. Is it the more conservative one? Is that the CD?
Yeah, it's the Christian Democratic Union, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
And the dude classified Scientology as a cult.
I mean, you can't blame them for doing that.
And so they're like, we don't want Tom Cruise being the head guy in this because he's a member of this cult. And so it took a whole bunch of, like, getting okays from, like, the Stauffenberg's family. That's the character Tom Cruise plays and is portraying then. Getting okays from them, and then is, like, getting okayed by where they could film because they're trying to use all the actual sites on where this stuff took place for as much as they could. It's, some of them are gone now. But getting okays from them, and then they were finally like, okay, you can make this movie. Just, you can't make it shitty, or else we're gonna have a massive uproar over it.
Right. And you say this one is pretty accurate, too, to the events. It's, if you wouldn't mind refreshing us on the more specifics of this Hitler killing plot.
Alright, so this one I actually like because they start off the first attempt. It's not the first attempt, but one of the attempts on Hitler's life was to hide a bomb in his plane, which was supposed to explode on his way back to Berlin. That didn't work, so they have to, because it was like that altitude was too high, and so it didn't set off the bomb. So they have to figure out the new way to kill Hitler and stop, try and end the war as best as it could end for Germany. So that's what Operation Valkyrie was the Germans' plan to, in case something happened. Operation Valkyrie was it was for civil unrest is what Valkyrie was for. So it was supposed to secure the government and stop civil unrest from happening. So the German members here were to use that to basically actually take out it was the SS who they were trying to take out from power and install themselves as the new government to negotiate with either the Russians or the Americans, whoever got to them first. And so the actual assassination plan was the most famous one to actually try and kill Hitler, where it was at his Wolf's Lair, is what they called it. It was his forward operation base, where they would plant a bomb in the council room, and that was supposed to kill basically everyone in there. And that's what Tom Cruise's character was supposed to do, is he was the one planning the bomb.
And with names like Wolf's Lair and the Stormtroopers and, all these other things, it's amazing that you don't see yourself as the bad guy. When you're at cartoons level of villainy, the Nazis, it's shocking you're not you think maybe we're in the wrong here.
And, that's basically what all the people that Tom Cruise was with were saying, that, hey, these are the bad guys, basically.
Yeah, so all these main people in the movie, they're all members of the German military, right? Or at least Tom Cruise's character is.
Yeah, Stauffenberg, he was at least lieutenant colonel ranking, I think.
Yeah, they're all decently high ranking.
Yeah, they're all high ranking members, basically, and then they're Tom Cruise has a lieutenant who's basically his butler in the film, because that's what it was like. That the colonels got to have little lieutenants helping them out and everything. But they're all either high ranking members of the German military or civilians. So there's I had looked this one guy up who he was the mayor of Leipzig, who they were going to set up to be the new chancellor of Germany after the war, or after Valkyrie was accomplished. And then so all these guys were supposed to take up all the new positions in the government to try and make it run.
Now, I know it's nice and all, certainly a great thing to want to kill Hitler, but as members of the German military, how were they as people, I guess, is kind of the thing.
I know they still weren't good people.
Yeah.
I know, who was it? Oh, the chancellor guy I was talking about, he's still anti-Semitic.
Naturally.
That was just kind of bred into people at that point in Germany, that so I know it was in his last letter to his wife or something, he was still the Nazis are bad, but they had a point about the Jews also being bad.
Jeez.
I'm you're still a bad guy.
Does it deal with those complications in this film, or does it kind of gloss over them a little?
I think that part was glossed over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a little unfortunate. It's always nice to deal with the complications of characters and in this case people.
Yeah, because at that point they were just we have to, because they did say, I remember while I was doing some research, they thought the final solution was way too far, though. That was the thing, that shouldn't have been done. But they still didn't like Jews or anything like that. So
You'll have that. At the very least, it's nice to see some people against the final solution.
yeah, but at that point they were just like, we just have to kill Hitler. That's what needs to be done first.
Well, it's at least
So-
a nice thing everyone can agree on, regardless of
Yeah.
your specific views on groups of people.
Yeah, this one I quite enjoyed because, like, doing my research, there's very few things I actually found, like, inaccurate with what was going on. Like, as I was going through, I watched this one actually, like, twice because I was doing my research while watching the film, so I had to watch it twice to make sure I got everything. There's really only one thing that I found that was, like, it was just glossed over. It wasn't like inaccurate. Is that when they were all getting arrested at the end because they were found out, one of the dudes asked to shoot himself instead of being taken in and tried by jury, and that was allowed. He shot himself. In real life, he did that, and then that didn't actually kill him. Like, he shot
Jeez.
himself in the head. That didn't kill him, so that Nazis had to shoot him again to actually take him out. But
That is dark.
yeah,
That's a theme with, I think, most of these. Is pretty dark.
oh yeah, But, like, I don't know, World War II is like one of the darkest moments
That's
in
fair.
human history. So I think these movies are good at capitulating that.
Yeah. So moving on, we're also getting the German perspective in this other film. This time a film made by Germans for Germans. It's German language film. We happened to see it because we were shown it in our German language class that we were in together. And, I think of it as a pretty good film.
Yep.
This film is Sophie Scholl. If I'm, again, not butchering it, I'm not good at this German pronunciation thing.
Sophie Scholl, The Final Days is the
That's
name
right.
of it.
Yeah, because the like German subtitles like, die letzten Tage.
Yep.
Gotcha. That probably wasn't any better. Sorry if there's anyone that actually speaks German listening to this. But if you want to give maybe a little synopsis, because I'll assume most people have not seen this movie that would be listening to this. It's not in America that big of a movie. Pretty popular in Germany though. Like it won some festival awards.
Yeah. All right. So Sophie Scholl, The Final Days is about the White Rose organization or group, which is, I think it was a total of like maybe 11 people or so. And they were civilian. They were all civilians in Germany during World War II. That they were very anti-Nazi, and they would drop propaganda to denounce Nazism in Germany. So these would be Sophie Scholl, her brother, and one or two professors, and then a couple friends. And so they were risking their lives to spread their belief that Nazism is bad through leaflets that they would drop all over. It was Munich? I believe it was Munich.
I think
the
so.
city.
It was a university town.
Yeah. It was the University of Munich, I think, because that's like the biggest university during this time in Germany. So there would drop leaflets all over with their own propaganda views, which at the time, saying stuff like this would get you murdered by the Nazis.
They are a murder-happy bunch of people.
Yeah. And so, this one seriously just tells the stories. They're about the final letter that they were making and the one that got them caught.
Yeah, it's a touching story. I'm not always about touching true story things, but when you get the case of something this serious, I can I can wiggle a bit on my
Mm-hmm.
my stance generally against them. So yeah, this, as the name suggests, primarily about one member of the group.
Yep.
Sophie Scholl.
Scholl.
Scholl. I'm gonna have a hard time with that. Her and a lot of her friends were the big members of this, and it's primarily following her
Yeah.
upon when they get caught
Yeah.
doing this. And
Yeah, it's supposed to show her time in jail being questioned by the Gestapo of, was this you who did it? And all of them would deny it until eventually the Nazis were like, we think you did it, so you're dead.
right, yeah, and they get it out of her a little easier because she's one of the last people to crack, if I remember right, or at least one person cracked already.
Yeah, I think one of her friends that did it.
Yeah, and so she's like, all right, you got me. Sorry.
Yeah, and I do remember in this that the guy interviewing her tried to have her, like, not die.
Yeah, because, the nice Nazi is just like, oh, this is just some girl.
Yeah.
Which,
Which,
maybe sexism might have been alright there. It almost saved her.
The sexism nearly saved her because they were like, oh, she's just a girl. She couldn't have been a major part of this. And it was just like, well, she was like one of the main writers and everything for the White Rose. Which I don't believe she denied it when they eventually found out that you were in fact part of this. I don't believe she denied it at that point. She was like, yes.
Yeah, that's how I remember it too.
And this one's actually very good because, like, since it's a German movie, they made damn sure that it was 100% accurate to what actually happened about, like, just everything that was going on for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Germans don't particularly enjoy talking about this part of their national history, which makes sense. Kind of Nazi pride is still a crime there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I remember this story that I saw in the newspaper maybe a year or two ago, of a American getting drunk, and he did a Nazi symbol there, and he had the shit beaten out of him by a bunch of Germans there.
Was this, I don't know if you know, Valkyrie was a little hard to make there. One, because of the Tom Cruise controversy, but also because you don't want to bring up Nazi things while in Germany, and when you're having to redecorate areas to be more historically Nazified, that's gonna not bode well to them. Was this movie also a little harder to get made, or was it less so since it's about the German resistance?
I don't think it had any trouble being made because it was being made by Germans, so didn't have, and it was like all German actors and everything. It wasn't the Americans coming in, and that was a major thing, is that Germany thought Hollywood movies were usually kind of garbage, so they were hesitant to have a American company come in, but the German company doing it was okay.
Yeah, and the director of this film particularly is just a German director. He started out working in German television and then went on to just do, more German films. Oddly enough, a few comedies, it looks like. And Sophie Scholl.
I do remember some of the dialogue, and they did have Scholl be kind of witty and make some jokes during her interrogation scenes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which I thought added a lot to the character to try and, like, make her seem like, oh, I'm gonna get away with this.
Right. Yeah, it kind of doesn't dawn on her until towards the end that it's 100% not gonna go well.
Yeah, because That was her goal, was to try and get her and her brother out of there alive. And it just didn't happen.
It's a little heavy of a movie.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to...
Well, the ending is probably the darkest out of any of these, because the final thing you see is Shoal, her brother, and I believe it's the professor, walking to the guillotine for execution. And then it shuts, and it goes to black, and then you just hear the guillotine go down on each of the three.
That's at least... It's a nice way to do it. Like, you gotta show that that's what happens. You gotta show that there's no hope. But with something like this, you can't glorify the deaths. You have to kind of...
That's the thing I thought was fantastic for the film, was that it did shut to black, but you still hear what's going on.
Right. Yeah, it's non-exploitative, I guess, is the point. Like these people lived, and you're telling their story, and you're not trying to use their story, I guess, is kind of how I would put it.
And that's like what was going on with Valkyrie too, which is also why I like Valkyrie.
Yeah, in this film, I kind of... We've lumped it in here, but this is one that probably would have been made without these previous films. Like, it's a nice German story, not influenced by Saving Private Ryan, not, influenced by any Hollywood film. Like, this is just a film that I would say was probably pretty important for the Germans to tell.
Yeah, because it was a thing showing that not everyone was a Nazi during this time, despite the Nazis' attempt to make everyone a Nazi.
Right, and that you still have German people, like normal German people.
Yeah.
Because it seems hard for the Germans to kind of reconcile themselves with these things. They don't show national pride anymore, for the most part, unless it's soccer related.
Yeah.
And it's just it's probably nice for them to get this kind of thing. Yeah, this was 2005. I'm not really sure. It looks a little older. I think maybe
I think it's the camera style of it was made. I don't know, what film do you think that would be? Like, it's not like...
It's definitely a film camera. They put in... It's a decently grainy stock of film.
But not like what you would see like during World War II or anything like that.
Right. They're not... It's not trying to look like that. And it definitely keeps a nice aesthetic for, I think, what they're going for. Kind of historicizes it, but without... going the black and white route, which not always bad, but not necessary in this case.
Get movies like Schindler's List, which are fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful films. Another Spielberg film.
Mm-hmm.
That one and Saving Private Ryan, not to derail, but both gorgeously shot. I can't remember who did the cinematography on Schindler's List, but Saving Private Ryan is one of his go-tos. I think his name is Janusz Jaminski. He's some European man, obviously, that does a really good job. And in Saving Private Ryan, the way that they kind of got the look they were going for is they put pantyhose over the lens.
Okay.
Like, pretty thin pantyhose, but still, just kind of to keep the grittiness there. It's one of the few films where I don't mind dirt flying, like, at the camera. I usually think it's hokey, but I think it really helps that film. Not to derail the talk. Was there any other things you wanted to point out in Sophie Scholl?
I think at the ending they show like the memorials to the Scholls.
I think so, yeah. Like after the final guillotine hit and before the credits, they do kind of one of those typeface that tells you kind of what happened to other people in the film, and you see pictures of the people involved, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the memorials in there as well.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really nice and touching to see that they're still remembered in Germany even before this movie was made.
Right, that's fair. So, we're not doing every contemporary World War II film. Before we maybe move on to this last one, let's do kind of an honorable mentions. Fury was one that came out, trying to remember
I think it was
the year.
2014 or 2016.
Yeah, it came out after Inglourious Bastards, but kind of felt like it was in the vein of, kind of on the coattails. I didn't get the chance to see...
I think it has Brad Pitt in it as well, too. As
That's
the main
true.
guy.
Yeah, that is weird. Did you get the chance to see Fury?
I've seen parts of it on TV, but I haven't gotten to watch the whole thing yet.
I've just been wondering how it is, because it also kind of got glossed over. I think it came out at a bad time. There was a lot of bigger films that kind of pushed this down. It was talking like it might be a return to form for Shia LaBeouf, which didn't end up happening, really. He kept doing his weird arty things.
Which, he was good in it.
Yeah, from what I saw, clips and stuff, he seemed like he was doing a good job. David Ayer both directed and wrote it. He's a big director. He did End of Watch, and then he later did Suicide Squad, though let's not hold that against him too much. Bright, which is kind of divisive amongst the
I've never heard of that one.
It was a Netflix original.
Okay, that's why I probably didn't see it then.
Yeah, I honestly kind of liked it, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of other people did like it. Schindler's List, we touched on already. Definitely a very important film. Not so much a World War II movie in the vein of a lot of these. Maybe a little like Sophie Scholl. It's more of like the drama, you know?
Yeah. And again, telling the story of a German that was kind of like going against the grain of Nazism.
Right, which definitely an important story. I heard Spielberg had like the rights and the script to this for a good while before he made it. He said, I'm just not, as a person, ready to make this movie yet. I need to grow as a human being in order to do that. And that was nice to hear. It's a nice little thing. And then upon making that, he also started doing a lot of work with the Shoah Foundation, the group that helps a lot of Holocaust survivors and stuff like that. So that's really nice.
Yeah.
What else? See, a lot of these we're dealing with the German front.
Yeah.
Would there be a reason you can think of why not a lot of these, besides this last one that we'll get to, dealt with the Japanese front? I know there was like Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, the two kind of sibling movies, as it were.
I think it's just because even though the Japanese are the reason why we entered the war, the main focus of the war was to take down Germany first. And despite everything going on in the Pacific theater, Germany was the much bigger threat to the world.
That is fair. Yeah, they were directly affecting all of the allies, essentially, that would be helping the United States.
Yeah, and for the Far East theater, it would be because Russia and Japan had already signed a pact that they'd be neutral to each other. So they don't join the war until literally like 2 weeks before the Pacific War ends. And so that would leave like the British colonies, the Dutch colonies, and the Americans basically left to fight the Japanese. So,
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's just not a theater that is as like sensational to look at compared to what Europe was.
I also know at this time, Japan as a country became a lot closer of a country with the United States. So when you're looking at films that came out in the 2000s, late 90s, and up through the 2010s, you're not necessarily going to want to be showing them as bad guys in a movie, especially since that's a big film market too. And Nazis make a much more compelling villain as well.
Yeah, and I'd also say probably also the cost for stuff would be a lot more expensive for a Japanese-themed one because you have to have the ships as well.
That's
because
true.
Most of the fighting were either jungle fighting, which you see a lot for like Vietnam movies. That's like what it was for the islands as well. And then, or you'd have massive ship engagements, which would cost a crap load of money to make. So, the tanks and aircraft type stuff in Europe would be a lot easier to film and make and afford than what you would have over in Japan.
That's true. Yeah, and again, not to dwell on the culture thing, but there were Japanese films back in like the golden age of World War II films. Like you had Bridge on the River Kwai. It's obviously like one of the more critically loved movies like that, and then you have several other movies that would be in the Japanese theater that kind of work a little more. But yeah, there's also a couple other mentions before we move on to the last couple films. A couple other German films. There's Das Boot.
Yep.
Have you seen that one?
I have. If we had done like a, not a contemporary, but like a old movie one, that's one I'd recommend. It's just that it's about a 5-hour long movie. So
that is the problem.
It takes a while to get through.
Another big German film, Downfall, which is probably a little more controversial because it's dealing about like the final days of Hitler through the lens of one of his secretaries that's also in the bunker and who survives the bunker, unlike Hitler. But that's an interesting film to see if you get the chance. It's harder to come across. For a while, it became a bit of a meme. One scene in it where Hitler's in a room with pretty much everyone in the bunker, and he asks all the like more civilian types and the secretaries to leave the room, and as he's doing that, his hands shaking, taking off his glasses, he's just angry. And then as soon as the door closes, you hear just like him screaming at all the officers left in the room. And the camera pans across the secretaries and civilians looking really scared. And it just kind of, people overdubbed a lot of jokey things to there. I think they parodied it in an episode of The Cleveland Show also. So I think that kind of covers a lot of the more contemporary films, unless there's some you can think of.
I can think of like a couple bad ones, but
by all means.
One that I actually quit about 3/4 of the way through was this movie called Monuments Men.
Oh, I heard of that when it came out, or was going to come out, and then I heard nothing of it after it came out.
Well, there's a reason for that, and it's because it's so horribly made. Like
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, you get a bunch of good actors in there.
Yeah.
The two main ones I can remember are Matt Damon and John Goodman. But, yeah, there's a bunch of, like, good, like, A-list actors in it.
I think it was directed by George Clooney.
George Clooney was in it.
Yeah, it's one of his directing attempts, which sometimes are good, but a lot of times don't make a lot back.
Yeah, this was bad because there's, like, no character development whatsoever for them. The Monuments Men were an actual group that were tasked with trying to preserve Europe's historical things as the Allies moved through Europe so they're supposed to stop the Allies from destroying it. They're supposed to stop the Nazis from destroying it.
Right.
So that would have been a cool movie. They executed it very, very poorly.
That's sad to hear.
So yeah, that's like, I think is like the top of like bad contemporary World War II movies.
Well, speaking of...
Except for this one.
Yeah, speaking of, let's move on to Pearl Harbor here. We finally get something about the Japanese. This is, what is it, 2001? It's the early 2000s. Yeah, it's 2001. We've got frenemy of the show, Michael Bay, is the director behind this. Kind of, I think, also coming off the coattails of Saving Private Ryan, which came out a bit earlier. Not a heck of a lot earlier, but 98. So that's probably what allowed this movie to be greenlit, is what I imagine.
That's what I was thinking. Because I honestly thought... Because I think the first time I saw Saving Private Ryan was about 2005, so that's when I thought it came out.
No, it's...
So when I looked it up, and it was like 90...
I think of it being.
When I saw it came out in 98, I was like, really? Well, that explains Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, right. So ostensibly, this movie's about Pearl Harbor. But there's also a lot of people
It is for
drama.
about 20 minutes of the movie.
I don't remember all the people drama. I remember that Ben Affleck is lusting after a nurse to the point where he gets inoculated like 5 times because she...
Yeah, that part was funny, though.
Because she gives him the shot in the butt.
Yeah,
like
he got like
do.
5 yellow fever shots.
That can't be good for you, was all I thought when I saw the movie. I was like, is this guy gonna die? I don't know how that works. I'm not a doctor.
I think he probably should have died at that point.
But that was a cute human part of the movie.
Yeah.
I don't really remember much else about the human drama. You've seen it more recently, unfortunately.
I unfortunately had to watch it for this on, like, this previous Monday. So, yeah, the people drama was basically Ben Affleck, his best friend, who I don't even remember who the actor is in that, and this nurse. Ben Affleck and this nurse were...
it's Josh Hartnett, who I think is his best friend.
They were in love. Affleck goes to be a volunteer fighter for the British during the Battle of Britain. He gets shot down and is stuck in France, so he can't get word out that he's still alive. And then the nurse and... what was it, Josh Hartnett?
Hartnett.
That... they fall in love with each other, kind of. And then Affleck shows up, and now you have a massive love triangle.
That doesn't sound like it's a lot about Pearl Harbor anymore.
Nope. I think I timed it. There's about like 30 minutes or so in Pearl Harbor.
And how long is this movie? This is a long movie.
This is about, like, I think a 3-hour movie or so.
Good God.
And this one is like the opposite of all the other movies of accuracy.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. That sounds like a good place to start.
Okay, so
it looks like you made a list.
Yeah, that just because I knew this movie was so bad from the previous times I watched it, I was like, let's go ahead and start making a list of things that are just plain wrong. Just a whole bunch of different stuff that I noticed. Like, one of the things that I really noticed was when they were doing, like, these, like, kind of, like, gorgeous shots of ships moving, like, out in the waters or something, like the Japanese Navy coming in, or the U.S. fleet docked at Pearl Harbor. They were, like, all modern ships. Like, they went and filmed the actual U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor right now. Because there's, like... these are older ships that are in the mothball fleet. They're the I think it's the Ticonderoga class cruisers, which were built, like, in the 70s or 80s. and totally different designs from the like the 1918 destroyers that were at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
It's just like, you guys couldn't have like CGI'd these things or something. I don't care if they look bad, you could have made them at least look like the ships that were actually physically in existence at that time. Or, and then one of the, like, glory shots of the movie was, the destruction of the USS Arizona. They show a dive bomber not dropping its bomb, not diving. Which, the literal name of the type is a dive bomber. They're supposed to be from high altitude, drop down, and then release the bomb into the ship, and then pull out. This thing was just a level bomber going straight over the ship and drop its bomb. Which is not how dive bombers work at all. It's just like, wow, okay.
How's it do with the events of the day?
The events of Pearl Harbor, that part was actually fairly accurate, except for like the little things like the Val dive bomber not dive bombing the Arizona to drop its bomb. The destruction scenes were, I think, actually pretty on point. There's one that I think was the really sad part of the movie, was seeing what happened to the USS Oklahoma, where it gets torpedoed so many times in the film, and it capsizes, so the ship flips upside down, and it traps the sailors in the ships.
Oh, yeah.
And so you hear them banging on with wrenches on the ship, so you can hear that coming through the hull. And the people are desperately trying to carve out sections of the hull of the ship to get these people out. And then, which is what was happening on the Oklahoma. And then you just hear the banging stop as they all drown to death. So that part I thought was, like, really good.
Right.
But I don't think it makes up for the other 3 hours of the movie. And that was another thing that I really didn't like about this movie, was that Pearl Harbor happens literally about 2/3 of the way through the movie. And the other third, they, for some reason, have to go on to the Doolittle raid, which is in April of 1942. Which is the U.S. taking land-based bombers onto aircraft carriers and bombing Japan. Which, cool thing, there's actually movies about that, about the Doolittle raid.
Right.
I don't think you need to cram an extra hour of movie onto Pearl Harbor. Like, it would have been good to have Pearl Harbor happen, have it be depressing at the end. Not followed up by, let's be Americans and bomb Japan. That needs to be that needs to be like the final shot, basically. I don't think that needed to be added at all.
That is probably true. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. I've
Yeah.
not been tempted to revisit it so much.
Yeah, I was honestly did not remember the Doolittle raid before I started watching the movie, that it was part of the movie. So I thought, okay, Pearl Harbor happened. And then I was like, wait, why is this still going? And then they introduced the Doolittle plan. I was like, what? Why is this still going on?
Oh, jeez. Yeah, is there, I guess, how well does John Voight do at being the president?
Was he FDR?
Yeah, he was FDR.
I actually liked him liked
pretty good
FDR in
FDR.
it. Yeah. Because they had him, like, doing his attempts at standing with the polio, of actually showing, like, him doing the massive braces that FDR would wear, and him struggling to stand and everything like that. I thought that was good. And I liked the speeches that they did, because they were fairly accurate to the actual... I went and watched this footage of FDR giving, like, the Pearl Harbor speech afterwards and everything. It was fairly accurate. is, just shortened up to
Right.
not be like 8 minutes of the movie.
Right.
So that part I thought was actually pretty good. They gave him some nice witty lines. There's one that I chuckled at where it's like, because it was a submarine captain that had apparently made thought up the Doolittle raid plan, and he was like, "I like submariners. They don't have time for bullshit, and neither do I." So I thought that was a good little line that was added in, but still, it was just not necessary in a 3-hour movie, though.
Right. Yeah, we prepared a nice little thing for this one, comparing this to an older film, because there were so many films in like the glory days of war films about Pearl Harbor. We picked what's probably regarded as the best one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that being Tora, Tora, Tora.
Yep.
I've not seen this movie at all. I kind of have a glaring hole in my film viewing about seeing World War II films, but this is a bigger one, and it's one that you've seen.
Yeah.
So let's compare. One in like accuracy and also two in quality.
I think this one just completely blows Pearl Harbor out of the water, because it is literally like the stuff at Pearl Harbor for the movie. It doesn't include a random love triangle thing that takes up the majority of the plot. It's by a Japanese director here as well. Let's see. There's actually 3 people that directed this movie, I think. There's I butchered this name. It's Toshio Masuda, I believe, is the person who directed it.
Yeah, according to this IMDb page here, him and the other Japanese director, Kinji Fukasaku, is
Yeah.
how I would say that.
Yeah.
They both worked on what this describes as the Japanese sequences.
Yeah.
And then Richard Fleischer worked on, I assume, non-Japanese sequences.
Yeah, so it'd be like the parts at Pearl Harbor, like the sailors and all that stuff going on.
Right.
Which, that's something I actually liked, was that it was you get the Japanese perspective of what was going on, and not the Americans of being like, just this happened. You get to see like the Japanese thought of like why Pearl Harbor happened and how it was accomplished. So that I thought was actually a fairly cool thing to actually see happen.
Yeah, we kind of get that later with the dual Clint Eastwood films. Except kind of at a more kind of going more for it, with it showing both the American and the Japanese perspectives of an event.
Mm-hmm.
But this is kind of smaller scale, being one movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty solid film then, from what you're...
Yeah, it's fairly accurate. That I'm not sure there's any major glaring weaknesses like what you'd see in Pearl Harbor or anything like that.
Right. Do they handle, I know, being an older film with a lot of grand things, how does the battle itself look? The bombing?
It's not as impressive as Michael Bay's, because Michael Bay is
Right.
all about explosions. So, and this was released in 1970. So, you have 1968 technology versus 2001 technology. So you got you could actually see the Arizona explode and everything like that in Pearl Harbor, where it's just not as impressive as
Right.
what you'd see in the Tora, Tora, Tora. But I still liked it. It's just not as cool as to watch as what you'd see in the whole actual sequence in Pearl Harbor.
Right. But still, one would probably say a better film,
Yeah.
naturally. Yeah, plus it's hard to beat the classics, too.
Mhm.
So any last things you'd want to say on Tora, Tora, Tora?
I'd say definitely go watch that before Pearl Harbor. And then
That's
don't
fair.
watch Pearl Harbor and then watch Tora 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 again.
So moving on, this is the most recent film. One I unfortunately still have yet to see. And I feel like I really missed my shot not seeing it in theaters. This is Dunkirk, the Christopher Nolan film. It's again about kind of a singular event similar to Pearl Harbor. And you did get to see this in theaters.
Yes. I specifically wanted to go see this one in theaters. That was not one I was going to wait to watch on TV because it's a Christopher Nolan one, so it's a lot about the sound of it.
Yeah, and that was what it swept at the Oscars, was both the sound mixing and the sound editing awards, is what it got. Yeah, and the theater experience was good, I assume, fully immersive, great visuals.
Yeah.
I saw a trailer for it when I saw, I think it was Rogue One in IMAX. They had like a very early but lengthy trailer to convince people to go ahead and get IMAX tickets for it.
Yeah, I saw it in IMAX, and it was like not just in IMAX. There's one back in my hometown at one of the local museums that I saw it at.
Yeah.
That has a like, I think it was like 120-foot screen IMAX. So, like that's tall, and then it's like twice as wide or something like that with massive surround sound everywhere. So it was awesome. Like you were vibrating from the planes and everything.
Dang. Yeah, and I heard a big thing with this movie, which has kind of, I don't want to say discouraged, but made it less of a priority to see at home, is that it's not so much a conventional film in the sense of it having a strong narrative, character-filled plot. It's kind of throws you in the midst of the events. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, you start literally as the Germans were dropping leaflets like saying "Give up, you're surrounded." So, yeah, you start right in the middle of it. And I've watched it 3 times. I literally don't know any character's name from it.
See, that's
because it's about the event. It's not about the character, like one individual. It's about what these people had to go through.
right, and I can respect that as a nice way of historically telling a story, and it's a great way to get the scope of it and great to get the epic scale. But like, as someone who generally watches smaller scale things, it's a little daunting to be given a film that you're like, this isn't so much about the characters or the narrative, it's about facts and experience.
Mm-hmm. Which, yeah, like, for characters, I literally call the people the actors.
Yeah.
So, like, it'd be Tom Hardy is the pilot, Cillian Murphy is the soldier with PTSD, and Kenneth Branagh, I'd always say Gilderoy Lockhart because that's who I've tied that actor most to.
Right.
But to the British Admiral. So it's like, I'm not even sure if they say the names of the people.
Interesting. Yeah, there's an interview that the studio tried to bury that Chris Nolan did that was that pretty much amounted to, if you don't see it in theaters, don't bother to see it at all.
I would agree with that kind of, because it was like definitely made for a theater screening.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys too that's all about the theater experience. He still shoots on film.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, several of the sequences shot in IMAX, which is nice because it's like 4 IMAX screens. I assume this one's pretty accurate.
Yeah, that because it was basically just made for you to experience what these people went through. So it was like, I'd say it's like mostly accurate. That there's like one thing that I noticed while watching the film that, as a World War II history buff, I know is completely wrong, and it was actually to do with the sound.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was the sound that the German planes made. It was the German fighters that would go down and strafe the soldiers on the beaches. They would make the noise that only one plane basically ever made would make, which was a German plane. It was the sound of a Junkers Ju-88 Stuka dive bomber, which would make how its wings were made would make a high-pitched wailing noise, which was meant to like demoralize the soldiers that they were bombing, which the German fighter Bf-109 fighters would not make that noise. They had a much more like roaring engine, and this one, the dive bombers, you would hear that wailing noise.
I see why narratively they would make that choice, though, to make that change.
Yeah, I understand why they did it, but that is wrong. But yeah, that was like the main thing that I saw, that I noticed that was wrong with it, and that's just because I happen to know like what those planes sound like.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to get too much into like spoiler type things of this movie since it's a newer film. Granted, since it's historical, it's harder to spoil. And
since there's no like character, it's not revolved around characters. It's actually kind of hard to spoil.
Right.
Because it's just centered around like, hey, this is what happened.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe kind of give a summary of it? I know historically some of the events.
All right. So this is about the evacuation of British soldiers out of France after France fell to the German invasion during World War II. So they were cut off from the Pas-de-Calais region of France, which is the closest part to England. It's the part that you can actually like see across and see England from in France. It's the Straits of Dover. So they're cut off there, and then they get surrounded around the city of Dunkirk in France. And so this story is about how the soldiers got back to England, and that was done because the Navy could not get enough ships out there without them being completely destroyed by the German Luftwaffe Air Force. So what was done was, about one of the main things from the movie was the British civilians took their boats, went over, and got the people. That's the plot.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think that's even anything the trailers didn't kind of hint at, so...
Nope.
So there you go. And you'd recommend it even on a home video screen?
I would. If you got surround sound, I'd definitely recommend it.
Right. Yeah, it definitely helps if you have a bigger screen, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, we got a nice setup with, like, about a 50-inch screen or so back at home, and surround sound, so it's really cool to watch it on there. But it's definitely nowhere near as good as seeing it in the theaters.
Understandable.
So, like, in 10 years, if, like, our local theater releases older movies back on screen, like, I saw Titanic for one of the movies there. So I'd kind of hope that they'd bring the Dunkirk back to be able to watch it again on the big screen.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I remember that movie not doing quite as well as they thought it would, box office wise.
I still think they made
I think they definitely still made money.
Huge amount of money.
Not Chris Nolan money, I think, is what it came down to, because he's a big box office success, generally speaking.
Let's see. I just looked it up on Wikipedia. They're saying the budget was $100 to $150 million, and the box office was $527 million.
Yeah, so they're not hurting.
Yeah.
But yeah. Any last things you want to say about Dunkirk before we finish up this episode?
I don't think so. That is a very good movie. I totally recommend people to go see it.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'll definitely have to give it a shot one of these days.
And it's fairly short, too, so It's about like an hour and a half or so, I think.
How weird for Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for talking about all the movies I still haven't gotten to see. Kind of probably make me watch these at some point, hearing all these good things about them. Not Pearl Harbor. Not to revisit Pearl Harbor. But anyway, thanks for coming on. Listeners, you can find this podcast on Google Play, on iTunes, on a lot of these third-party podcast places like Podbean, Overcast, I think Pocket Cast, bunch of places, I don't know. Distributor puts it out a lot of places. And you can find us on Facebook under All About Movies and Instagram under All About Movies Pod. So thanks for listening, everybody, and see you next time.